Gabriel that they were close to. And he called Dr. Sorensen, that wasn't a child doctor, he was a heart doctor, and he said that he would take him. And I took him down to him, and he's the one that really and truly saved David's life. And Dr. Sorensen sent us to Salt Lake, and he had a biopsy on his kidney, and he told us that he was so bad he didn't think that we'd ever take him home. And I think it was just through faith and prayers that David got better from that. He's been in remission for quite a few years.
Growing up, some of the things that I remember is the organizing of the jobs. You had 5 daughters and then 3 boys later. And a mealtime was quite exciting around our house to feed 10 people. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or
It was, but you just do things because that's the way it is. You don't think what, poor me or anything, you just get in and do it. But it was quite a time to have to fix 3 meals a day for that many children. I don't remember them saying, oh, I don't like that, I don't want this, I want something else. They knew what was there is what we had. And I think they grew up appreciating what they had and realizing that.
You had some of the girls responsible for setting the table, sweeping the floor after, washing the dishes, drying the dishes, and rinsing them off.
That's right.
Every meal we kind of rotated. You did the same outside with yard work too. Mowing the lawn, taking care of the lawn, picking up those notorious rocks.
Well, everyone had chores that they needed to do, and I think most everybody was real willing and wanting to do. And I can say that even my boys can cook and clean house. I think it's important. If you live in a home, you're responsible to help with all of it. There's no way that one person could take care of that many people and wait on them alone. And we didn't have that much room. We had one small bathroom, and we had bunk beds in our bedrooms, and if things weren't done up and kept up, I couldn't have handled it. I've always been that way. I've always liked to have things as neat as I could.
When we were interviewing Dad, he mentioned that his mom and Dad took you guys up to Yellowstone for your honeymoon.
Yeah.
I never knew that. He didn't say much about it other than that.
Yeah, they did, and they camped out somewhere, and then we went in and stayed into a cabin. It was different, but I didn't know any different. It was okay. But when we went to Yellowstone, that was quite an adventure for me. I had been up to Logan, and I'd been up to Richmond, but I'd never been anywhere further than Yellowstone. And to go to Yellowstone and see all that, and go in the shops and see all the things, and it was really exciting to me to be able to go that far and stuff.
Do you remember some early married experiences that you wanted to talk about today?
Well, let's see, I was thinking of something before, but when you're first married, you don't have any children or anything, so you pick up on friends. We spent a lot of time with Boyd and Carla, and Lois and Bob Johnson and Karma and Warren Hamp, and we used to get together and play cards and so forth. But we played mostly, and Daryl and Ruth Smith too, after they got married. But we really played more later on with Boyd and Carla. And then we also, after our wards split and so forth, we used to have dinners at each other's home with Don and Lamar Carlson and Elaine Carlson and Don, and Mars moved in Christensen after we was into a different ward. But after the children started coming, why, then you kind of put your baby in the stroller and went visiting to different places in the mornings.
There's a lot of things that, in looking through some old albums that I've seen pictures, you were involved in a lot of plays at church and school.
I was, and even after I was married, I was in a play that our stake put on.
Every year at Christmas time we would get new pajamas on the 24th so we'd look good on the 25th, and they were always handmade. Do you remember how we used to get those given to us?
I used to put them out on the front porch and pretend to the children that Santa Claus had come early and left a package on the front porch, and they'd wear them to bed that night. That's when they always got new flannel pajamas. When our kids were little, I sewed everything that they had, and I know when I was making doll clothes at Christmas time, I had to be very careful and trade scraps of material with other women so that the kids wouldn't recognize the material on their doll clothes.
We had some doll clothes that were crocheted too. Did you do those, or did Grandma Hurst?
My mother crocheted some, and that might be what you're thinking of. She had these little dolls that she crocheted for. My mother always sent our kids some little thing for Christmas because she said they always appreciated everything, and I always had them be sure and thank her for it, and that was important to her.
Some other things that I remember growing up is you made the best root beer. It cured out on the front porch, if I remember right. You used to make it up and set it outside.
We used to make homemade root beer, and we would cap it with a bottle capper, and you set it out in the warm, and then after so many days when it started to work, you'd put it where it was cold.
And
that sounds good. I haven't thought of homemade root beer in years. It was just something different about it. My mom and dad always had homemade root beer over the 4th and the 24th, and homemade ice cream.
Yeah, you do the homemade ice cream thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what our famous song was that we used to sing at home evening in our family?
I really don't.
Love at Home.
Probably so, yes.
We sang Love at Home
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
What's some of the church callings that you've held?
After we were married, I had a lot of church callings, and I think back on it, I always thought you should never turn down a calling in the church, but I had one calling that I felt like it was very, very hard. But when I was first married, Carol Miller and I were called to be drama directors in our ward. And both of us were kind of young and kind of dumb. We really hadn't had a lot of experience, but I remember what a good time we had and putting on a little play, and it kind of got me acquainted with people in the ward. But some of my church callings that I've had, I was always a primary teacher or something, and I taught MIA. I had the Beehive girls, but most of my church callings have been in executive positions. I was called to be on the primary stake board, and that was really hard because I had a lot of little kids at that time, but I really enjoyed it. Thelma Woodland was the stake primary president at that time, and soon after that I was called to be, I think my next calling was stake young women's, and that was very hard calling for me. I had 6 little kids, and I wasn't that old, and it was quite hard. I enjoyed it, but it was a hard time for me. And then I was called to be a counselor in the Relief Society with Mary Jean Purett, and after that I was president. And then I went in the Stake Relief Society as a secretary to Carla Tripp. That was very enjoyable. And then I was Relief Society president again in 2nd Ward. Now that we're in California, I'm doing extraction, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that.
One thing that you organized when we lived in Richmond still, most of us kids were married. I remember I was married and I had Paul. You did something very unusual one time. You sent invitations out to all the kids, and you told them that they were invited over to the house for a special meal, and they had to come ready to have fun and to not worry about being proper or dressed nice. Do you remember that? Do you
Yes,
remember
I
what it
remember
was?
that.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that special dinner?
But you know, that really wasn't my idea, it was Rex's. I think that was after he and Tess were divorced, and he came up, and he'd heard the girls talking about these spaghetti dinners they used to have at the college, and he says, let's us have a spaghetti dinner. And I says, are you sure? He said yes, and so I did. I sent out the invitations, and he got a clean piece of plastic, a brand new one, and got that all wiped up. And he's actually the one that cooked the spaghetti and everything. And we had a big salad in a bowl, and we had he made the spaghetti, and we dumped it out in the middle of this plastic sheet, and we gave them great big utensils to eat with, and they had to just take their utensils and draw the spaghetti over to them and then put some salad out. And there was a couple that thought it was kind of weird and they wasn't going to go for it. And I said, sit on your chairs if you want to, but you're going to be hungry. And people got into it. We had quite a good time. And after that, we had a treasure hunt. And I had only time that I've ever put anything to rhyme. And it was about things around the yard and what had happened when they were growing up. I thought it was a fun time.
It was really fun. That's treasure hunt. You covered almost all of our lives and how things affected us and where things happened. Because we lived in the same home all our lives growing up. There was a lot of history there, and I think that's one thing all of us think back about a lot is that spaghetti dinner and the treasure hunt. I know I do.
I wished I'd have kept a copy of it.
I wish I had too. Tell us a little bit about what happened that one day. Was it Philip that almost drowned? Do you remember that?
No, it was Rex. I was at the kitchen sink doing dishes, and David and Rex had gone down to Hughie's to play, and something just told me, go quick. And I went as quick as I could, and David had him by the back of his pants holding him before he went under the culvert in their little ditch in front of their house. And I felt like that was the Holy Ghost prompting me. And I've learned over the years that you better listen when something comes to you.
You know, another thing when we were growing up, all of us kids loved to play games. And I think that was something that was instilled in us early on. Christmas time, we had a lot of things that were homemade, but you also gave us family gifts. And we always had puzzles and games to play with. And we were all pretty good at putting puzzles together, and we were also pretty good at card games. We would walk into that room, there'd be a lot of presents, but when we got done, everybody would have 2 or 3 things, necessities, and then we'd have a whole bunch of family games. And those meals that we would have were just outstanding with homemade rolls.
Oh, I think that's where I learned to enjoy playing games and doing things. It was when I was a kid at home, because you made your own entertainment. You didn't have television. You didn't always have radio, because sometimes the lights would go off in blinding. They wouldn't even work, and you'd have to light the little lamp. But when I was a kid growing up, we did a lot of things like that. We played a lot of games. We made a lot of honey candy, popped a lot of popcorn, and peeled a lot of apples. And as a kid, as I was growing up, we used to play in the neighborhood a lot. About every night we would play softball and play kick the can outside, and sometimes we'd even throw a potato in the fire and roast it. And then in the wintertime we did a lot of sleigh riding and so forth, and got together after. And that's what, when we got married, that's what we did with our kids.
All of us kids are pretty handy with our hands. We've all got talents and crafts that both you and Dad have instilled in us. What are some of your talents and hobbies that you've taught us? And I also would like you to tell us a story about teaching all of us girls and your oldest son about knitting.
Well, the girls wanted to learn to knit, and I was teaching them how to knit, and David was, he could have been 3. I don't know how old he was. He probably was 3. I think Rex was the baby then. And he wanted to learn to knit like the girls, so I had knitting needles, and everybody was learning to knit, but he made a mistake and dropped a stitch or something, and he got the scissors and cut it. He was going to fix it. He was going to cut it out. He didn't think that was so interesting when it all started to coming apart. But I think it's important. I'm proud of my kids and the talents that they do have. And most of them have picked up on things from either their dad and I, and some of them are really enjoying a lot of painting. As I don't like to single anyone out, they all have talents, but Ruth is very good with her toll painting and so forth, and now she's starting to paint on pots and different things. And David has a very, very extraordinary hobby that he's enjoying at this time, and he's crocheting bears with very, very fine thread and so forth, and I'm proud of him, and it's something that he really enjoys doing. And it doesn't matter what you do,